between Toronto Metro University's Diversity Institute and Advance, Canada's Black Music Business Collective. Keziah Myers and Ian Kamau are here with their thoughts on this. Keziah is the executive director of Advance. Ian Kamau is an artist and culture critic. Keziah, Kamau, welcome to the show, y'all. How's it going?
Good. Good to see you.
Hello.
Delighted that you guys are here. Keziah, I'm going to start with you on this one. I would say, look, there are a lot of Black musicians and Black music professionals working in Canada who maybe will read this report and not be surprised in the least by the findings in it. They'll be like, yes, we've seen the systemic barriers around. Given that, I'm curious, when you make a report like this one, who is your audience? Who do you have in mind for introducing this information to?
Yeah, totally. Thanks for the question, and happy to be here. So the report itself is for everyone. And yes, people are not going to be surprised, specifically the Black community are not going to be surprised by what is now in report form, but it moves us from anecdotal knowledge into data knowledge. And so that now gives us the opportunity to put it in front of those people who are in government relations, those people who are government agencies and funding bodies. If we are looking at who this is created for, it actually supports the Black music business professional because data is king, because they can walk into spaces knowing that it is adding to our culture's collective capacity in terms of research. It adds to the academic community, it adds to the archives. It also is a step in the right direction when we want to build more research on top of this foundation. And so it's actually for the entire ecosystem to use as seen fit. In some cases, it's going to be that Black music business professional who says, yeah, nothing's changed. I know all of this, but now I have something that actually is concrete data that supports it.
Yeah.
For a government agency, it's going to say, oh, wow, I didn't realize the problem was as vast and wide as I thought it was. And it really does help to eliminate those areas of perception being thought as reality. Perception is when I walk into a label, now I see more Black people hired. Reality is the change has not actually been amassed to a point where that person who's working there or those couple of extra people are working there have decision-making positions. So all in all, for everybody, really.
I take that seriously. The idea that if you are a Black professional, you're a Black artist working in this industry, you maybe sort of experience a lot of these things as either personal to you or to your close circle of friends. And it sort of moves the conversation to a different territory when you suddenly have the data that says, not only am I not alone, it's actually the majority of us in this industry who feel this way. That's sort of the power of research. Any findings in particular stand out for you personally?
Yeah, well, I was really surprised to see that 98% had not applied for funding. I anecdotally understood that funding was not received or you weren't successful in your application, but I will say that when I noted that 98% of the 1,700 people that that were part of the primary source, which was a survey, had not actually applied for funding. That was one of the key findings. The other thing that surprised me was how many people were experiencing discrimination and racism in their workplace, which amounted to about 55%. But then if you look at how many people feel a sense of belonging within the industry, it's 63.7%. And so I thought that that was really interesting to look at the inverse as to why. And it comes down, I believe, to the culture that we have as Black professionals, the culture of the Black experience, the African diaspora, what we've brought in, and how we are as a community. We're an oral community. We are based through the arts. Coming through Underground Railroad, there were songs that connected you from point to point to point. So it was really interesting to see that the sense of belonging is 63% from the professionals, but they are actively experiencing racism and discrimination on a daily basis, which was really, really unfortunate.
Kamau, I want to go back to that first number that Keziah mentioned because it's actually a really striking number. Like in this country, there's a good, solid number of grant bodies, of bodies sort of like have funding available to them, especially in the music industry. I'm thinking here of like SOCAN. I'm thinking of Factor. They do great work. They do great work getting money out the door to artists and professionals who need it in order to continue doing that work. The number that Keziah mentioned is not 50% of people had not applied for grant funding. It is not 60%. It's 98% of Black people in the music industry had not gone the route of even applying, of even considering that that is like a path that is available to them. There's a lot going on there. You've been navigating the music industry for over 20 years as a hip hop artist, as a writer, among other art disciplines. You've read this report. What was your takeaway from all of this?
I think my first takeaway was just like for Black artists in the Canadian music industry, things have barely changed. The funding is still low. The barriers are still high. Black art and Black artists are still undervalued. I think the thing that stood out to me the most in relation to that number in particular was not just that it was something like, 2% of the people that may have been actually eligible for that funding were actually applying for that funding. It's the second number. I can't remember the specific number, but how few people actually of that 2%, 89%, how few of that 2% actually got any funding.
So they apply and they're still not getting any funding.
So they apply and they're still not getting any funding. And that would mean if so few people are applying and so few people are actually getting that funding, then why would I continue to apply for that funding and just not look for another avenue?
Kamau, I also want to I want to spend a bit more time on this because the idea that you've been working for 20 years and then you're sort of observing that nothing has changed. Keziah brought up the excellent point that like perception is not reality. But I think like a lot of people look at the Canadian art scene now and see more Black artists winning prizes, more Black artists in really prominent positions. And it sort of feels like that is the right kind of change. We're headed sort of in that direction. And then we get a report like this. How does that sort of square with the perception that people are seeing? The idea that you're seeing more Black artists in more prominent positions, because I think that is also a real thing. It's just not necessarily bearing out in these numbers.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that like red carpets are not profits. The average music industry career for an artist is about 4 years. And a lot of the time we're looking at America and we're looking at Canada. And just because you see very prominent Canadian artists, the people would naturally be people like Drake, people like The Weeknd or Daniel Caesar, all these people, doesn't mean their infrastructure is actually in Canada. And so what we're talking about is Black artists in Canada and the Canadian music industry in Canada, not Black artists from Canada who have infrastructure other places.
It's an under talked about point. The idea that you see all of these Black artists who get pushed very, very well, I think, in this country, but they did not necessarily like build that infrastructure to get that support, to get that promotion in this country. I think that is an entirely sort of different thing. Keziah, this report is meant to give us a sense of the issues that Black artists and professionals are facing in the industry, but it's also worth noting that like some of the data that you use in this report is from U.S.-based research about Black music in the United States. What did including this research that is based in the U.S. sort of give this report that you wouldn't have gotten if you were specifically looking at Canadian data?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, context. It adds additional context to the conversation. If we look at record labels, a lot of our music businesses that have offices in Canada, their head office is actually in the U.S. So these conversations started decades ago, as it did also in Canada, but the large entities were actually in the US. And so the thinking, the mindset, the strategies were taken from what was happening in the US and picked up and brought to Canada without an understanding of context in Canada. And so I think that is definitely one piece. There's a CBC and BBC docuseries that just came out called Paid in Full. Yeah. And Paid in Full also speaks to the infrastructure that was building in the US. Data has been collected. Research has been done. Unfortunately, in Canada, that research has yet to be done. We did use a number of Canadian sources, but when we're looking at academic sources, that research just wasn't there. So in order for us to paint a realistic picture that does include a shared experience that Black professionals are having here that is akin to the experience they're going to have in the US, it was really important to pull some of those really key data points. And so now we have this piece of information that is actually about to be used in the UK and Australia as their secondary sources.
I was going to say, what I take away from that, Keziah, is that it's both, right? Like the idea of it's really great that this report exists is also quite shocking that this is the only report of its kind. And the idea that this is like the opening of the door for more reports of this, because they're obviously needed. Kamau, we're going to close on this last question here. Okay, I want to say, like, you represent a road traveled by a lot of Black musicians in this country. You make and release a lot of your music independently. You've navigated the public funding system in ways that maybe other artists have not necessarily. And then also the music that you make has taken you to sort of across the border to the US, but also to the UK, and all over Europe, as well as in Canada. When you think about the way that this report is structured and what it tells us about being a Black artist in Canada and the things that you've navigated yourself, what do you hope other Black artists and Black professionals in the music industry take away from this?
What do I hope? My focus is always the artist. I think the thing that I would take away from it is just that the majority of artists that we actually see, they are often the lottery winners. I think that it's important for artists to understand the business that they're in and the environment and the audience that they're looking for. And I think artists need to focus on business and entrepreneurship, innovation, even all things that Canada is not exceptionally good at. And understand intellectual property and where their actual profit centers are when they're choosing to move forward in what is essentially an entrepreneurial endeavor in being an artist.
I think that is even just that short little bit about the idea of like looking to your intellectual property and what your actual rights are. There's so much just to unpack there, but unfortunately I got to leave it there. Keziah and Kamau, you guys are the best. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Keziah Myers is the executive director of Advance, Canada's Black Music Business Collective. The organization just released this new report centered on the experiences of Black artists and professionals working in the Canadian music industry. You can find that report on their website. And Ian Kamau is a culture critic and multidisciplinary artist. His latest piece is called Loss. You can catch playing it January 9th to the 11th at the Apollo Stages at the Victoria in Harlem, New York.